Meet Daniel. He's a college student with a solid moral compass, a reputation for empathy, and a bright disposition. By all typical measures, he is a genuinely good person. Yet 6 days later, Daniel is unrecognizable. He patrols a dim hallway, barks harsh orders, and actively humiliates people entirely at his mercy. His empathy has evaporated. His actions are cruel. How does a kind, grounded individual undergo such a total transformation of character in under a week? Daniel's shift illustrates the specific mechanisms that allow ordinary, well-meaning people to commit terrible acts. When we see unethical behavior, society typically defaults to the dispositional view. This is the psychological assumption that wrongdoing is the result of an individual's internal flaws, the classic bad apple theory. Psychologist Philip Zimbardo challenged this assumption. Drawing from his own historical experiments, he coined the Lucifer Effect. Zimbardo's research shifts the focus to the barrel, the system, demonstrating how engineered environments dictate the behavior of the people within them, often overriding personal traits. If evil is a situational consequence rather than a fixed personality trait, then the capacity for cruelty is not confined to a monstrous few. Under the right conditions, almost anyone is susceptible. To understand how the environment breaks down morality, we have to look at Daniel's first hours in the simulation. The descent begins with a physical stripping of identity, removing his civilian clothes, his name, and his personal style to put on a standardized uniform. De-individuation is a psychological state where a person loses their individual identity, absorbing into a larger group. As facial details fade, distinct shapes become a single mass. Blending into a unified group, their accountability drops, and they stop evaluating actions as personal choices. Erasing the individual self removes the first barrier to cruelty. Harmful actions cease to feel like personal moral failures and start to feel like necessary group mandates. Even so, the transition to cruelty isn't instantaneous. When a distressed prisoner begs Daniel for a break, Daniel hesitates. His baseline morality briefly flares up, resisting the harsh expectations of his new role. Then, a senior authority figure steps in and commands Daniel to enforce the rules. The hesitation vanishes. Daniel complies immediately. This schematic maps out the mechanics of obedience, famously demonstrated in the 1963 Milgram experiment, where participants delivered electric shocks under orders. As you can see here, an explicit command from a recognized authority bypasses the subject's moral filter entirely, directly triggering the action. The authority figure doesn't rewrite the person's internal ethics. Instead, they provide a psychological permission slip to ignore those ethics without feeling the usual sting of guilt. Once the initial threshold of abuse is crossed, the group dynamic cements it. The guards begin to joke with each other about their harsh tactics. This peer validation actively normalizes the cruelty through moral disengagement, the process of convincing oneself that ethical standards do not apply in a specific context. This demonstrates diffusion of responsibility, a phenomenon where the psychological burden of a negative action is divided among everyone present. When a dozen people share the blame for an action, the guilt felt by any single person drops to near zero. In the 2003 Abu Ghraib prison scandal, soldiers were photographed laughing during acts of abuse, mirroring the peer-validated normalization seen in the simulation. This same pattern appears in corporate cultures that prioritize profit. By splitting unethical tasks between different departments, the system ensures no individual employee carries the full weight of the company's actions. Once abuse is normalized and responsibility is fractured, the environment creates a cycle of cruelty. The system continues to produce harmful results, yet the distributed nature of the work means no one feels personally to blame. When the simulation is terminated, the manufactured pressure evaporates. Daniel looks in a mirror, failing to recognize the person looking back at him. This brings us to the ultimate debate of the Lucifer Effect. If the environment engineered Daniel's behavior, who is actually to blame for the suffering he caused? Is Daniel responsible, or is the system? The psychological consensus bridges both arguments. Systems construct behavioral patterns and apply immense, sometimes overwhelming pressure. However, the individual still physically executes the action. They still possess the final agency to make a choice. Recognizing the power of a toxic environment does not absolve personal responsibility. It simply explains why maintaining your moral compass under severe situational pressure is exceptionally difficult. Therefore, the Lucifer effect functions best as a warning system. If we know that toxic environments corrupt people, we must engineer institutions with robust safeguards, mandating strict transparency, clear accountability, and ethical leadership structures that resist abuse. On a personal level, individual awareness is the most effective defense. Knowing exactly how situations, uniforms, and authority figures manipulate human psychology makes you highly resistant to those very forces. The boundary between good and evil is a permeable shadow, heavily influenced by the rooms we stand in and the roles we play. Maintaining morality isn't a fixed state. It requires constant vigilance and conscious choice.